Today's daf is daf Chav Zayin, and we'll begin with Vatanya. I think we did this yesterday, but we'll review it again. Vatanya, the Mishnah told us that the mouth of the shofar that's blown on Rosh Hashana in the Migdash was mitzupa zav. And the Gemara asks Akasha steer from a brayso tzipo zav. If you line the shofar with gold, that's not such a simple matter. If you put it exactly where it separates between the mouth and the shofar, that disqualifies. Shalom mokum piv kosher. If he puts it in a way that it would separate his lips from shofar, that's possible. The Mishnah is talking about a case where it doesn't do so. The Mishnah establishes that on Rosh Hashana in the Beis HaMikdash, the shofar was accompanied on both sides with chatzotzos. So the Gemara asks the following question: Trei koli mimich tamoy. We have a principle that you can't hear two kolos simultaneously and discern one from the other. Vasanya, zachar v'shamar v'dibur echad. There was a great miracle, and to reconcile the discrepancy between Parshas Yisro, where the Torah says Zachar Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, Parshas Vayeschanan, where the Torah says Shomer Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, is they were all said b'dibur echad. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu recited both Shomer and Zachar simultaneously. Mashe'ena pe yochol l'daber, v'ena ozen yochol l'shmoa. And it's impossible to hear these two sounds simultaneously. Trei koli lo mishtamoy. So how could it be that we're blowing the shofar and chatzotzos simultaneously? There's going to be a mixture of these two kolos, and we won't be able to discern one kol from the other. And the chova of the mitzvah of Rosh Hashana is to hear the shofar. How are you going to hear the shofar when at the same time you're blowing the chatzotzos? And the Gemara answers, "L'kach marich b'shofar," that the chatzotzos would be blown, and at the beginning of the blowing, simultaneous with the shofar, but they would end prematurely while the shofar would continue to blowing. It means you heard the end of the tekiah, even though you didn't hear the beginning of the tekiah. L'meimra, shall we assume, therefore, the chishama sof tekiah below tchilas tekiah yotza, that all you have to hear is half of a tekiah, and that means that you heard the last half of the tekiah, but by an inference, we can derive the conclusion that Mimela Chilas Tekiah below Sof Tekiah Yatza. And likewise, if I heard the beginning of the Tekiah, but I was drowned out at the end of the Tekiah, I would be Otei Toshma. Why don't we take a look at a brayso? And in fact, this is going to be a Mishnah that is going to establish that you cannot hear part of a tekiah. You have to hear either the beginning and the end, from A to Z, from beginning to end, or bust. And the discussion is about the tekiah lefaneh and the tekiah lachreah. The Torah commands us to blow a trua, and it should be preceded and succeeded by a tekiah, and then you go on to the next seder. So what happens if in the final tekiah, after the trua, you are marich, you blow it for a long time, and we split that kol into two. First half would be to be yotze the previous seder, and the second for the succeeding seder. Toshma, we learned in the Mishnah, Taka B'Rishona, he blew on Rosh Hashana the tekiah of Seder Malchus, which is attached to the trua, and then Umashach, he extends that tekiah, bishnia, meaning the second tekiah, which is the one that's after the trua, kishtayim. So let's say he needs the equivalent of 9, what they call turmisin, 9 sounds, and instead he did 18 sounds. Ein biyado achas. It's only considered as a tekiah for the second tekiah of Seder Malchus. It cannot be considered part of Seder Zichronos. V'amai tisaliklu b'tarte. Why not say we split the tekiah? We have enough of a tekiah for Seder Malchus, and the same Tkiya could now serve as Zichronos. What are you going to tell me that he didn't hear the whole Tkiya? But we just finished saying that in the case of the Tkiya, the Migdash, which was accompanied by the Chatzotzos, he only heard the end of the Tkiya. He was not able to hear the beginning of the Tkiya. And the Gemara answers, Psuke Tkiyasa me'adadi lo paskinon. We cannot split a Tkiya into two. And therefore, you cannot be Yotzei two different Chiyuvim with one single Tkiya. But if he heard half of a Tkiya, he certainly could be Yotzei. Toshma, I'm going to prove to you from a Mishnah that you cannot be Yotzei with half a Tkiya. Hatokeh l'toch habar. So he's standing outside the bar, but he puts his head inside a bar or a dus or the tocha bar or the tocha dus. Oh, he left that o tocha pitas. Just 1 second. There's a mistake here. It should say o tocha pitas. Yeah, a mistake here in my in the printing here. Olatochapita. So these are various types of subterranean crevices or open areas, open space, whether it's a bar, which is dug from the beginning of the ground down below the ground. And again, even though the tokeh is standing outside the bar, but he puts his shofar as he's blowing inside the bar, or inside a dus, where that's a binyan al gabi karka, or a pitas, which is a chavis gadol, a very large barrel. And now his ears are outside the bar dus or pitas, whereas the shofar and the kol shofar is inside the bar or the dus or pitas. Very complicated. If he could testify that he heard clearly a kol shofar, even though the shofar bounces back and forth, echoing from the walls of the bar, but he was able to hear a clear-cut kol shofar, yotza. But in kol havarasham, if he hears a mixture of the, the kol bouncing off the sides of the bar, etc., lo yotza. Now wait a second. Wouldn't you have to grant me that on my lepok v'tchilas tkiya mekami delarpiv kola, he heard part of the tkiya before it bounced off the sides of the bar and got mixed up. So for 1 split second, he heard a pure tkiya. And he should be yotzei now with tchilas tkiya. Again, our case was where he was yotzei after the chatzoso stopped with the sof tkiya. So the Gemara has an absolute equation between tchilas tkiya and sof tkiya. It must be that if you heard half a tkiya, you're not yotzei. Ella says the Gemara, we have to come up with another answer as to why chatzotzos does not bother the sound of the shofar. Trei koli michad gavri lo mishtamoy, but trei gavri mishtamoy. You have those who are blowing the chatzotzos and he who's blowing the shofar. You can hear kolos from different sources. But to hear 2 kolos from the same source, that's already trei koli lo mishtamoy. So, for example, Zachar v'shamar b'dibur echad. It's God, and He, with a capital H, is projecting a voice of Zachar and Shamar. Can't hear both of them. They come from the same source. But if you're hearing from 2 different sources, even simultaneously, you could hear them both. And therefore, I can hear the shofar and the chatzotzos at the same time. So the Gemara asks, we trade Gavri Mimish Tamoy Vatanya. We have a brayso of the Kriyas HaTorah. Echad Kore v'echad b'targim u'bilvad shelo yeh echad Kore u'shnayim b'targim. You cannot have 2 people read at the same time or recite the Targum at the same time, because you can't hear 2 kolos, even though they're coming from 2 different people. So how did you solve the problem of chatzotzos and shofar? So Gemara says, our case of Tkiyah Shofar, Lo Damya El Seifa. In the Brisa, the Reisha discusses the case of Kriyas HaTorah, and the Seifa, the cases of Hallel and Kriyas HaMegillah. What does it say in the Seifa of the Brisa? Behalel u'b'Megillah afilu asora korim. Even if 10 people are reading the Megillah simultaneously or reciting Hallel simultaneously, you could be Yotze, and you could hear and discern that one single call. Alma, we see, they came into Chaviva Yoav Daite, that even though on one level it's really difficult to hear two voices and two sounds, and that's going to be true for Kriyas HaTorah, but in the cases of Hallel and Megillah reading, we have a special Chavivus, which we'll try to explain in a minute, and as a result of that special Chavivus, a person makes that extra effort, he goes the extra mile, and he's able to hear one voice and discern it from the other. He's Yotze Megillah, even when 10 different people are reading the Megillah simultaneously. What does it mean, Chavivale? So Rashi says, Chadoshim lo be'es hamirasam. It's very new for him. The last time he heard Megillah reading was a full year ago. Hallel also is very rare. So he's no saying libo lahakshiv v'lishmoa afal pi shekolos yotzim mipi rabin. Masha Ein came, but not in the case of Kriyas HaTorah, where he reads it every Shabbos. That's not considered chavivus miyuchedes, and therefore trei kol lo mishtamoy. However, in the note over here, he quotes a sefer called the Yom Trua and offers another interpretation. Why is there no chavivus with regard to Kriyas HaTorah, and therefore we apply the principle trei kol lo mishtamoy? Number one, because Adam chayiv lahashlim parsiosav imatzibur echad targum shnayim mikra v'echad targum. So even before he gets to hear the Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos, he's already recited his Kriyas HaTorah because shnayim mikra v'echad targum. So it's really old hat. Now, Rabbi, you served as a rabbi in a community, am I right? And you know that a lot of people, chas v'shalom, will shmooze during Kriyas HaTorah. Not in your shul. Okay, in a different shul. I don't want to mention another shul. And the answer is, you know why they're shmoozing during Kriyas HaTorah? I have no doubt, because they were yotze in the mitzvah of Shnayim Mikra v'Echad Targum. Right. Ella to the Marines, as we say. Anyway, he offers another explanation, and he says that Hallel and Megillah are machmas hanes. They're a result of miracle. And we give Hodah to Hashem for a miracle, but Shofar is but Kriyas HaTorah is not for a miracle, and Shofar is L'zichron Akedas Yitzchak, La'alas Zichronim Shel Yisrael L'fnei Aviv Shemshmayim. No schmoozing during Kriyas Shofar, because people want to hear that voice that's going to go up to heaven. Is Hachinami and Tkiyas Shofar came into Chaviva Yoav Taitei Bishama Ela Lama Marich B'Shofar. Now, until now, we said he was Marich B'Shofar so that we can circumvent and obviate the problem of Trei Kol Lo Mishtamoy. Now we're establishing there is no problem of Shtei Kol Lo Mishtamoy because of Chavivus, but the reason why he's Marich B'Drush was because Leda, in order to publicize Shemitzvahs Hayom B'Shofar, that the main mitzvah on Rosh Hashana is not the Chatzotzos, they are secondary, but rather the Shofar. Ubetinios, the Mishnah says, Tokim B'Shel Zecharim Kfufim Upia Mitzupim Kesef. In the case of the Shofar of Rosh Hashana, we have Mitzupah. Why isn't it the same in the case of Tinios, the Shofar of Tinios? Maishna Hasam the Zav, why is it different? And in the case of Rosh Hashanah, it's Zahav. Maishna Hach the Kesef. The Gemara says, I'm going to offer you two answers to your question. Ibai, saying one answer is Kol Kinufya the Kesef, who the Torah is going to teach us that whenever you're blowing in order to gather the people together, we'll see that in the case of Chatzotzos, then you do so with a Kli Kesef. Tichsiv, in Baaloscha it says, Hasei l'cha shtei Chatzotzos Kesef, And the purpose of blowing chatzotos is to gather together the people. And it has to be made of kesef. And on tinios, the purpose of the kios is to gather the people together for tefillah and for tachnunim. And therefore the shofar was coated with kesef and adzov. I have another answer. The Torah had compassion on the financial expenses of Klal Yisrael, and in order to require that they do a tzipiyah to be mitzapeh the shofar with zav on tinios, that would be an outlay. The zav is worth many, many times more than the kesef. So the Gemara asks the following question: but Hasan Nami Niyovid the kesef? What about Rosh Hashana? If you're worried about the expenses and how much this is going to drain the economy, then you certainly should be stingy with regard to the tzibui on the shofar that's blown in the Beis Hamikdash of Rosh Hashana. Gemara says no. Afilu hachi kvod yontif adif. In the case of tinios, there's no kvod yontif. But here, in the case of Rosh Hashana, there's a mitzvah of kvod yontif. We're going to have to set up a beautiful coating over the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, and that's going to be made of zahav. And we're going to, for the meantime, we're going to ignore the principle of Torah of Rahmana. Chasa al mamonim shel Yisrael. Rav Papa bar Shmuel savar lemevid uvdi kimas nisan. He thought that in Pumbedisa, where he lived, he would do this thing and he would blow on the shofar Rosh Hashanah together with chatzotos accompanying the blowing of the shofar. Actually, did I say Pumbedisa? I meant Arda, sorry. Amalei Rava said, Lo Amru Ela b'migdash. We only accompany the shofar of Rosh Hashanah with chatzotos in the Migdash. The Gemara is going to derive this from Psukim. Tanya Nami Hachi. When do we blow a shofar with chatzotos together? That's only by Migdash. Aval Bigvulin outside of the Migdash. Makom Sheish chatzotos. That's on tinios. Ain't shofar. Makom Sheish shofar, like Rosh Hashanah, also Yovel, ain't chatzotos. V'chein hinig Rabbi Chalafta b'tzipori. Rabbi Hanania ben Shadyan b'sichni, they would blow shofar together with chatzotos. Ukshabah doreitz al chachamim, the chachamim were not happy campers. Amru, they declared, lo hayu nogim ket. We don't have a minhag to blow both shofar and chatzotos simultaneously. Ella b'sharei mizrach v'arabayis bilvad, only in the Beis Hamikdash. And how do we know that in the Beis Hamikdash we should accompany the shofar with chatzotos? What's the source for this? The Chsiv, a pasuk in Tilim Tzadiches, v'chatzotos v'kol shofar hariu l'fnei HaMelech Hashem. And what's l'fnei HaMelech Hashem? That's in front of the Mikdash where the Shechina resides, and there it's got to be v'chatzotos v'kol shofar. L'fnei HaMelech Hashem hu d'ba'ina and chatzotos v'kol shofar. The Alma. Low outside of the Beis Hamikdash, it's not Lifnei Hashem. We don't accompany the shofar with chatzotos. The Mishnah said Shavah Yovel l'Rosh Hashanah l'Tkiya l'Brachos, and Brachos is a reference to the Nusach HaTfilah, that the Nusach HaTfilah on Rosh Hashanah, which is the famous Musaf, is an identical twin to the Musaf of Yovel. Amar Yehuda bar Yitzchak, this could only make sense. Keman matzlina na idna, ze hayom tchilas Masechet, zikaron liyom rishon. We recite in the Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah, and we begin Zichronos by saying this is the day of the creation of the universe. That means that Rosh Hashanah is the day of the creation of the universe. Well, it's true. Keman Rabbi Eliezer, Diyomer B'Titrei Nivra Olam. You remember back on Daf Yud, we had the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua disagrees. Rabbi Yeshua holds in Nisan the world was created. So it's impossible to say the words on Rosh Hashanah and declare Zeh Yom Tchilas Masecha. But Masav Rav Eina objects and says, how can you tell me that we are reflecting the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, and our Nusach of Musaf will include that this is the day of creation, when the Mishnah says, Shava Yovel Rosh Hashanah L'Tkiyah Brachos. And assuming that Brachos means Tfilas Musaf, of Malchi Zikrot Shofros, Va'ika Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet Zikar Yom Rishon Rosh Hashanah Yisa Yovel Lesa. Yovel is on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is not the day of the creation of the world, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. So how could the Mishnah equate the Musaf and the Matbei of Bracha of Rosh Hashanah and Yovel with Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet? So the Gemara answers, you know what? Our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, and Rosh Hashanah is Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet. The Chi Ketani, when the Mishnah says that Shava Yovel Rosh Hashanah L'Tkiyos L'Brachos Asha'ara, it's referring to the Nusach of Musaf, but not to the Tevos, not to those separate words of Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet. That certainly is a difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yovel. On Yovel, these words will be omitted. Rav Shesha Bereder of Idi Masni Hachi, he has this entire Shakavataya in the opposite direction, according to his tradition. Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Hadisnan, when it says in the Mishnah, Shava Yovel Rosh Hashanah L'Tkiyah Brachos, Keman Delo Ki Rabbi Eliezer, but rather this reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yeshua. The Rabbi Eliezer, if it would be Rabbi Eliezer, is came in the Yom Tishin Nivra Olam. How could you then equate the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah with the Musaf of Yom Kippur? Ika is a clear-cut distinction. Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet Yom Rishon Rosh Hashanah Isa Ubi Yovel less Rosh Hashanah. We could say this, but not on Yom Kippur of Yovel. That's not the day of the creation of the world, and therefore it's not possible to equate Yovel and Rosh Hashanah legamri. According to Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that Benisa Nivra Olam, that even on Rosh Hashanah we're going to omit the word Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet. And therefore, we can have an absolute equation between the Musaf, the Matbei of Musaf Rosh Hashanah, and that of Yovel. The Chiktoni Ashara. So the Gemara ends up by saying, you know what? We could reconcile our Mishnah even with Rabbi Eliezer, but the Mishnah is only equating Yovel with Rosh Hashanah for brachos, but not for Zeh Yom Tchilas Masechet. And now we get up to the Mishnah.